Welcome back to None of the Above. The state of California is officially planning to close its death row in the next 2 years. That state's governor, Democrat Gavin Newsom, says the plan is now to move all condemned inmates to other prisons and turn it into, as he calls it, a positive healing environment. The move comes 3 years after the governor placed a moratorium on executions, excuse me. He added that state's current death row system is deeply flawed and something that gets his blood boiling. In 2016, state residents voted in favor of an initiative extended to speed up executions, but it came with one provision that allowed people to be moved off of death row. Officials are now capitalizing on that particular provision. California's last execution occurred in 2006, and new rules are set to be put into place to make inmate transfers mandatory. Joining us now to discuss more about this, former U.S. Assistant Attorney and legal analyst David Katz. David, welcome to the show tonight. So how big of a boost is this announcement here for people who are pushing to abolish capital punishment in and of itself?
Well, I think in other states, you take states like Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, they're not really very persuaded by California's example. It's certainly true that our governor here has had a moratorium. The state itself has not had an execution, as you said, in about 15 years. There are about 700 inmates who are on death row. They're confined to a cell. They have very few privileges. And now they'll have more privileges because about 100 of them have been moved. JD, about the other 600 will be moved soon. Oregon did that a couple of years ago. They have a much smaller group of people on death row. And of course, that presents some practical problems. It presents the problems of, are they safety risks? Can they be moved into general population at other penal institutions? And it also raises, of course, a political issue, because as you mentioned, although some policies are very popular with, universities, with the intelligentsia, so forth, one of them would be abolish the death penalty. One would be affirmative action. And yet both of those measures have lost rather decisively on referenda that we have here in California among the voters. So I think what we're going to hear next is what these DAs are hearing in San Francisco and LA. They're going to hear a backlash, a pushback from victims. And they're going to say things like, oh my God, the man who murdered my son, he's going to have a conjugal visit. He's going to have a Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner. I don't spend Christmas and Thanksgiving with my son anymore since this murderer killed him. You're going to hear that kind of a backlash, I think. But certainly as a practical matter, it makes sense if you're not going to execute anybody. Why have all of these 700 people on death row? And it costs more money to have a death row. And if you're not going to use it, if you're not going to execute anybody. And let me just make one more point. We still have a federal death penalty. And so to the extent that the death penalty is more popular than it may poll, and it's certainly popular when you have some victims' right person, right, start talking about their own son or daughter who got killed. You take a case like this Petito, right, on a federal national park with laundry. That could have been, if Trump were in power, that could be a federal death penalty case, right? A lot of these cases in the blue states where they have practically abolished the death penalty could be subjected to a federal death penalty.
Absolutely. David, how often are wrongful executions, and what does that history suggest with regards to the advocacy that has been done to try and dismantle the process up until now?
Well, I've spoken at law libraries and other fora about wrongful convictions, and it's a huge problem. And of course, we've had hundreds of these wrongful convictions that have come to light. The two people who were convicted and spent 20 years or more in jail for killing Malcolm X, it turns out that they weren't guilty. They were exonerated. There was a police detective who hadn't leveled with the prosecution about what the actual facts were and what he knew about the shooting. So, of course, you want to avoid the death penalty because, it's irreparable. It's irreversible. And so you can't go back, JD, and give a person a new trial, even if the DNA shows the person was innocent, shows the person wasn't guilty. And, of course, that's one of the many arguments that are made, in academia, in the intelligentsia, whatever you want to call it. I think, to me, in common sense, against the death penalty. But I just do want to point out to your viewers that we can't forget the fact that particular cases, it's popular. Someone says, oh, my God, this person did such and such a thing. And people think, you know what, I kind of know him when I see him. And that person, at least in a lot of people's sensibilities, that person deserves the death penalty. I'm not suggesting that Laundrie, before he committed suicide, deserved the deff penalty.
Sure.
But you could take some cases, child victims, serial
Absolutely.
murderers.
David, I'm sorry. I respectfully, I got to try and cut you off just so I get time for my last few questions, if that's okay. I'm sure you understand. According to different reports here, an estimated 5 to 10% of people that wind up on death row suffer from some degree of mental illness, that there's a mental health component about this, the resources of which do not frequently wind up there. And so what more needs to be done, or what have you seen from where you sit in this situation with regards to better resources that can go towards the mental health component, if that is something that the governor in California is prioritizing?
Well, I'm not a prosecutor anymore. I'm a criminal defense attorney, and I have cases like this. I have a number of clients who have mental health issues, and we treat them also very leniently in California. But when you come into the cases where you have a murder, manslaughter, those cases are not subject to a lot of the mental health diversions. And so a person in a charge like that has to either beat it on, old-fashioned insanity or temporary insanity, or they may not have a defense. In other words, they've made it very difficult to make the so-called Twinkie defense, the diminished capacity defense here in California.
All right, former U.S. Assistant Attorney and legal analyst David Katz. David, thanks a lot for helping us or better understand this story on the show tonight. I appreciate your perspective and time. Okay, we now.